Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Tanya Tucker, and I'm with the Full Frame Initiative. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Wellbeing Blueprint Town Hall. We know folks are slowly logging in, and we'll probably have other folks joining on, but wanted to go ahead and get started. Excuse me as I'm trying to advance my slides here. Wonderful. Before we sort of dive into our discussion today, let me just go over just a couple of sort of logistical notes. So if folks could please mute themselves as they enter. We envision this really as a rich conversation and discussion, so there'll definitely be opportunity for us to hear your voice and questions. But while you're not speaking, if you could mute your lines, that would be great. Also, we'll use the Q&A section if you have a question throughout the webinar, as well as sort of the raise your hand. And you'll be able to ask a question and we'll unmute you. You can unmute yourselves and to ask a question. Like we said, we want this sort of less us talking at you and this really being an opportunity to hear all of your voices. So let's dig right into why we are here today. Thanks again for joining us. We just launched the Wellbeing Blueprint just about a month ago, and hopefully some of you were there and participated in that launch event. But we wanted to have this town hall really as an opportunity to hear from you, to hear what's resonating with you about the blueprint, what's exciting you, what challenges you see, and perhaps advancing the principles and recommendations that are in the blueprint. How can we bring this blueprint to life? This really is about action and transformation and really getting at structural change. And so how do we bring that to life, and what do you need to really engage and spur that action? And what should our next steps be? Big, small, collective, what can we do together? And what support as a blueprint action community can we help you to advance that? And so this really is about having a conversation and a discussion. And while we have outline for the flow of today's town hall, which you see here on this slide, we really want to be flexible and kind of go where the energy is with this group, and making sure that we are focusing on the things that are of most interest and important to you all throughout our conversation today. And so before we get into conversation, just a really quick overview of the Wellbeing Blueprint, which will be a regrounding for some of you that joined us on the launch event or have been to the website exploring it already, and for some of you perhaps a grounding for the first time. And so Full Frame Initiative is really pleased and happy to be part of what is a growing group of public sector, nonprofit, and community leaders who really share a commitment to using this moment that we have to drive changes that will move our country, that will move our systems, our communities towards equity, towards well-being, and towards justice. And so the Wellbeing Blueprint is a community of action which is advancing a dynamic roadmap for systemic transformation. And that really moves us beyond kind of reinventing or just sort of tinkering around the edges within our specific fields, but really asks us to focus on environments where everyone has a fair shot at well-being. And that truly is our vision for the Wellbeing Blueprint effort. And we know that true transformation requires removing removing the roots of racism across our fields and our sectors, and really rerooting that change in well-being. And for us, well-being isn't something that is a nice to get to or something that's extra. It really is the foundation. We all have a universal drive for well-being, and we know that our contexts provide us vastly different access to well-being, whether that's based on our race, our gender, orientation, religion, wealth, and many other factors. So this is really about centering on people and what matters most to individuals, to families, and communities. And the blueprint is a call to action to really shift our country's structures and systems to better align with people's needs, their strengths, and the reality of the moment. The blueprint is a set of 6 principles, and we're really calling for structural changes aligned with these principles. So you see the principles there. Start with what matters to people, well-being, push against the harms being concentrated in communities already facing the greatest adversity, build on instead of undermining social connections and social capital in communities. We want to span boundaries. This isn't about working in our silos, but how do we work across sectors and fields and issues? And we want to set our default to sustaining transformation beyond the pandemic. This may be why the pandemic may be why we are spurring some of this action, but we really need to be thinking beyond the pandemic and long term. And so each principle has a set of recommendations. Some have sub-recommendations, examples, and tools. And so there are more than 40 recommendations throughout this blueprint that span fields and geographies. And the recommendations are concrete policy recommendations, as well as recommendations for different decision-making frameworks. And so that quickly was what the blueprint is, the principles, what we're hoping to accomplish. And so we really want to hear from you and get the conversation going. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Gladys Carrion.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm Gladys Carrion. I am a senior fellow at Columbia University Justice Lab. And prior to that, I ran both at New York State and New York City, the child welfare and juvenile justice systems. And so this is an opportunity for us to have a group discussion about the blueprint, about what resonates about the blueprint. Why are you here today? We really are interested in learning that from you. And I'll start off the conversation by sharing why I joined. And so I joined a little later in the process and became part of the kitchen cabinet because I really found a community of like-minded people that were thinking about these issues and these issues that are really important. And for me, what really resonated was the sense of really leading with principle. What grounds your work? And as I ran these 2 systems of really trying to see what informed my work, what really was the purpose, what did I want to accomplish? How could I do this better? How could I reduce the harm that I was causing? And really focused on creating pathways to well-being and opportunity. And this is what the blueprint speaks about. And really being able to think about that some more, build that out, was really what interested me in really coming together with full frame to really think through what a blueprint for well-being, a blueprint for transformation and structural change would look like. And so that's why I'm here today. And it really resonates with the work that I've done and the work that I continue to be engaged in. There are big things that we can do, and there's small things that each of us could do to move us in this pathway. So with that, in the interest of having you all come into the conversation, I really open up this forum for you to make any comments and observations and share with us what's exciting, what's resonating, what questions do you have about the blueprint, and what do you perceive might be some of the challenges. And so I welcome that and want you to raise your hand, and so we can call on you. And if you have questions and you just want to, sign in those questions in the Q&A, please do that. So who is going to be the bold soul that's going to start us off? Raise your hand. There must be some reason why you're here today. What interests you?
We got a couple raised hands.
We've got a couple of
Okay.
raised hands. Yep.
So-
So Susie,
Yeah.
Hey there. Can you hear me?
we
Yes.
can.
Great, great. I'm a longtime community behavioral health provider, and I work at Sound, which is outside Seattle in King County. And I was exposed to the Full Frame Initiative at a workshop some years ago. And I have been following you guys online, and I just thought this was an opportunity. I absolutely stand for what you're doing, and I think this kind of a way to approach wellness for everyone is right on.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Susie.
Who's next? Tanya, can you see?
Let's see. Hold on. I thought I saw another raised hand.
Yeah.
I can jump in, Tanya, while you're looking. 'Cause
Sure.
I raised my hand. It's Atisha King.
Oh, thank you.
So my name's Atisha King, and I'm actually I actually am with the Full Frame Initiative, but and I'm only saying that because I know people are familiar with me, but I'm here outside of my professional role. As it relates to my relationship with being staffed with Full Frame, but I'm here as an individual simply because prior to coming into working with Full Frame, it was I already recognized, and so let me just say I joined Full Frame because it really resonated with the way that I wanted to shift the work and how we're working with people. And so I had been looking for an opportunity here recently to become a part of something outside of the context of my professional role in the sense of being a staff at Full Frame. So I am, it was a fairly easy choice for me to make around like becoming a part of the work that's happening with the blueprint and wherever it may lead us in respect to my community and the people that I live around here in St. Louis. I don't know if I voiced that I am from St. Louis. I am in St. Louis, Missouri, and so it's an opportunity for me to be in that space, and I want to take advantage of it.
Thank you. That's great. Anyone else have a comment? Raise your hand.
And I put the questions into the chat so you can see some of the questions we're asking, and really interested in what drew you to the blueprint and brought you to our town hall today as well.
So I see a question from Michael Wilson. He says, I'm wondering how you see democracy as part of the Wellbeing Blueprint. So I asked the question, how do we see democracy, and how do you see democracy as being part of this blueprint? Anybody game to give that an answer?
I mean, I think, my initial thinking goes to the blueprint is about, centering on people and what matters to people. And certainly giving everyone a fair shot at well-being and everyone, access to well-being really is about shifting, I think, power dynamics that exist within our systems and our structures. It's about listening to community in lots of different ways than we have been. It's about finding solutions in community and trusting people in community and not othering, people along lots of different lines. And I would see us doing this work and really trying to get at some of the systemic and structural barriers that are getting in the way of people realizing their well-being would also have an effect on sort of everyone, right? Everyone matters, and everyone's voice matters, that I think aligns with sort of democratic and democracy like principles and values. So I would see a way and sort of like an alignment with the values here of sort of promoting democracy and lifting up everyone's voice at the same time that we're, you know, trying to give everyone a fair shot to well-being. So I definitely see a connection there.
I agree with you, Tanya. I mean, I think that really undergird our conversations all along about inclusivity, having everyone in a community at the table and participation, and it's a fair shot for everyone. And so I think that really is aligned with the notions and the sense that we have about what democracy looks like. And I think that that's been missing, about who gets to make decisions about what resources we have and how we use those resources and how we participate in a democratic society. Any other comments, questions?
It looks like we have a comment from Rachel.
Okay.
And the question is, I'm drawn to the blueprint because it resonates so much of what I believe. My question is, how do you imagine people using this? How can we each use this in our own world to make a change?
That's a great question. And basically how we envision this town hall is we have a whole piece on, so how do we bring this to life, right? There are lots of documents with recommendations and different kinds of blueprints that just become a document, right? And get sort of filed away for historical value. And that's not what we want the Wellbeing Blueprint to be. This really is about action and what can lots of different people do, no matter you know, what issues you're working on or what sector you're a part of or what role that you play, you know, within your organization or, you know, community. As I think Phyllis said early on, there are big and small things that need to be done that help us on the path to transforming our systems. It's not just sort of one thing and automatically we've, you know, totally rebuilt our systems and gotten rid of all the structural barriers. But there are big and small things, and that's partly what we want to hear from folks and what pieces are resonating with you and that align with, just like the question around democracy, like that are aligning with the work and the values that you're bringing to this. So we'll, in just a bit, sort of dig in to one or two of these principles and really sort of have a conversation around specific actions and things that people can do. But I think there are, you know, a variety of ways for folks to engage inside the system and outside the systems. We need both. We need folks in community working on these principles, as well as leaders and people working within our systems to change.
And I would add that, you know, one of the ways, hi, I'm Phyllis Becker, and I'm a senior fellow with Full Frame, and I'm also a former administrative and juvenile justice. And just in the development and beginning to think about this, one of the ways that brought it to life for me is, you know, working with a group of folks cross system to begin to think about what if we really did have a focus on well-being in our country, and how could that help us address the community's needs, provide services in a way that makes sense, break down silos and begin to address some of the issues around equal access to well-being in this country. And so having these conversations with people across sector and cross industry was very, it sparked a lot of energy, it sparked a lot of thinking, it sparked a lot of ideas. That's how I got Gladys. Gladys and I started talking about it, and so she also joined us. And so then from that circle, we expanded it to other people to give us feedback, because we really want to make sure we're looping this back to people to help shape what this looks like and how it operationalizes. So just wanted to add that as well. You're on mute, Gladys.
Yeah, I'd just like to underscore that I strongly believe that everyone can make a difference in whatever space they are. And so what we're asking you as you do what you do, whether you do it in community, whether you do it at your place of work, you do it at your place of worship, to think about how you're doing it and what needs to change to really promote well-being or guide that process of really thinking hard about how am I doing this? What needs to change? What really is at the core in the context of the work that I'm doing that can be done in a way that is different or is guided by these principles? And I think that's really something that each of us, in whatever space we are in, can really strive to do in a really more thoughtful way. Because I really do think that each of you, people have power and they kind of underestimate the power they have and that power to change. So we have another question, and it's from Michael Wilson. It says, I'm a social scientist, and are you thinking about how to measure aspects of the efforts addressing the blueprint to better understand how they're working and can be improved? I think that that's a long-term goal, right, Tanya? And it's certainly something that we're committed to doing.
Yeah, and yes, absolutely. It's keeping us up at night, how we're thinking about measuring all of this. But we definitely, like we said, since this really is about action and ultimately transforming our systems and structures that are holding people back and putting too many barriers in their way for them to access their well-being, we do want to measure the types of actions that people are taking, looking at the impacts of those, learning from those. I don't think I can emphasize enough that we want this to be a community that is not only taking action, but that is willing to connect with others around that action to share, what did you learn from this, right? Like, what's working well, what didn't work that you'll never try again. And I think it's in that sharing across our sectors, across our silos, that we'll be able to advance the principles. I would also ask, I'm going to answer your question with another question, but I think, Michael, we'd love to engage with you as a social scientist to help us think of what are going to be the most effective ways to measure an effort like this, with lots of different people playing lots of different roles and engaging in different ways. What are some of the ways that we could think about measuring and looking at the impacts of this blueprint effort?
Right, and even defining what success looks like, right?
Yeah.
Are there any other questions, comments? Are we ready to move to Phyllis?
I think we can, yes.
Okay. So I'll just introduce myself again. I'm Phyllis Becker. I'm a senior fellow with the Full Frame Initiative. And in my other life, I spent many, many years in the juvenile justice system and working in juvenile justice transformation and reform. And what a wonderful conversation and what great questions. We're excited to hear about how people are thinking about well-being and how that can help help us and the folks we work with get through this difficult time in our country, and maybe offer some solutions. So in this section, we want to get more concrete and dive deeper into the blueprint principles and recommendations and bring them to life. The process we're going to use can also be one you can use for yourself and your own organization, with your community, and with policymakers. So there's lots of ways to approach the blueprint and make it more concrete, and we're going to offer one. But there's different, there's going to be different ways people engage with this. And we, let's see. So there's some really basic steps you can think about, which is on this slide that we're looking at now. It's not the only questions or steps you can use, but these are some just basic things you can do and to begin diving into those blueprints. You can identify, people talked about some of the things that might resonate with them around the blueprint. That's a place to start. Can be a place to start. Whatever sparks you, whatever's a need or a challenge in your community, that can be the place to begin to look at what principle and recommendations might be a fit for your organization or your community or with the policymakers you're working with. And so when you look at that principle and its recommendations, you can discuss its issues. You need to kind of chew on it. What does it mean? And what is its impact in your community? Because it's going to be different in different places. So you want to look at what the issues are. So what are the issues around well-being? What are the issues around spanning and breaking down silos, spanning boundaries and breaking down silos? What are those things that are going on in your community? And then kind of envision what's possible. You want to think about, if there was a change to happen here, if we span those boundaries, what would that look like, and how would that center our work better on community? How will that center us in a way that's addressing gaps in equity and addressing racial discrimination? So, and from there, then you have to determine what it will take to make a change. And you're doing this, again, this is not something we would recommend you do. You want to do this with partners. You want to have people you're bringing to the table. That's where you're going to get some of the energy and synergy. So then you got to figure out what it takes. What are the specific rules, laws, regulations that might be a barrier to access to well-being? What are the policy structures and training, and how can you do this in a way that centers on community, that works, the community is a partner with you, and looking at these issues and what it means to change, and not just after fact in the planning process. So those are just some really basic things that you could do to begin to bring the blueprint alive. Gladys and I are we're going to give you, thought it might be helpful to showcase some bright spots and examples to highlight efforts and how they connect to the blueprint. And I'll give you an example about one organization's efforts to use the blueprint and what they're doing with it. So Gladys is going to talk about some efforts and examples of bright spots that are spanning boundaries and breaking down silos.
So one of the examples that I have that I think really, is for me kind of exemplifies the principle, embedded in the blueprint and the kind of work that we're thinking that we need to do and how we do it, was, while I was in government. And those of you that have worked in government and even in universities understand how siloed government is, and one agency doesn't speak to another agency, and it's not integrated, it's not coordinated. We don't leverage resources effectively. And how do we change that? And one of the challenges that I had running the child welfare system, is particularly young people that are aging out of foster care, young people that are in care, both that are systems involved in child welfare or juvenile justice. I happen to have run both systems. Really, how do I create pathways to opportunity? I'm a child welfare agency. I don't know anything about employment, right? And those efforts to try to learn about employment were failed. And so really thinking outside the box of who knows in city government or state government about employment? There's usually another agency. But does a child welfare agency ever speak to this other agency? Rarely, if ever, or any other agency. We don't collaborate, we don't partner. But one of the challenges that I had was really, I have to really create some opportunities, some way so that young people, when they age out of the system, have some skill set, have an opportunity to enter the workplace. How do we get them jobs that pay a livable wage? And so this idea that we had was to partner with our civil service agency and really see if we can, for me, I thought it was low-hanging fruit because there are lots of really good jobs in city and state government. And so how do my young people access that? How do I get them ready? There's a civil service test they have to take. And so we partnered with our civil service agencies to prepare a curriculum and a program that we jointly developed to train young people to take the civil service test. And so we created that program and we did, it really worked well. It was a pilot and now it's embedded in the work that both the Child Welfare and Civil Service agencies do to really we created this program where young people were trained on how to take this test. What's this test about? They also then were counseled on all the available jobs and what jobs would they qualify for with a high school diploma. What jobs did they qualify for if they didn't have a high school diploma, if they had a high school diploma, if they went on to colleges, and really, learning the world of work within city and state government, and having them visit other city agencies and speak to people that were doing the jobs that they might qualify for. Was really exposing them to a totally different world, but really leveraging the resources of city government, state government, of these two agencies to really, and we waived the fee for the tests that are charged. And we were exploring to see whether they could get extra points on the test like veterans do. We weren't successful, but I'm sure that we haven't given up with the city trying to do that. But this was an opportunity for another agency to learn about the needs of these young people, really put a face to what everybody perceives to be a problem, but thinking outside the box about how do you create different pathways for young people. Most of you know that young people that are in foster care and age out don't age out, most of them, to go to college. And so how do we change that dynamic? So that was one example of really leading. Yeah.
I have a quick question. So what kind of structural changes did you guys have to make when you were spanning those boundaries between different local, state, and? So
we had to blend, the issue always is how do you fund this, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to learn how do we transfer money from one agency to another agency? How do we both share in the development and of the curriculum and of the program? So the biggest challenge was really the fiscal one of how will we finance this, and both agencies did this at very little expense and contributed, but it was really about creating a relationship with the other agency, and that realizing, and then also understanding, were there any legal barriers? Were there restraints at the age that a young person could take the civil service test? Thinking about that, there wasn't. We didn't know, but we didn't realize. So sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and you think that there are these barriers when there aren't these barriers. And so it was really exploring what, if any, barriers, and really then saying, how can we design that we use the civil service offices, their equipment. They worked with us to identify which agencies and which employees and staff people were willing to be part of the initiative. And so we discovered that we could work together. And what was great about it was the civil service folks actually learned who our kids were and really were very committed to provide internships and opportunity. It was a risk. I really didn't know who that commissioner was, reached out to her, and we should be able to do this across agencies in any jurisdiction. And so it was an opportunity to create this partnership that endures to this date.
Okay. did you want to do another example or?
Well, another example that I have, once again, if I think about government, was, after school programs. Once again, young people that are in foster care, young people that are in the juvenile justice system, that have been system involved, sometimes really are overlooked when there's funding available and the design of programs, the sense that these programs aren't for these young people. We established a collaboration with our youth agency in the city of New York and created a fund, which we created a fund to provide summer youth employment opportunities and jobs for system-involved youth. So we actually created jobs within our detention system. We actually created jobs within other city agencies and internships for our young people who were in foster care to be able to have access to summer employment opportunities. This, once again, was working across silos. I mean, folks didn't know who these kids were, somehow had these preconceptions about bad kids or, kids that are challenging, and really breaking through those stereotypes and those biases where they learned who our kids were and that our kids were entitled to have these opportunities. And at the end of this, the Department of Youth allocated $1 million to create programs, summer employment opportunities, along with all the other kids in the city that had access to these programs. And so we helped our young people be able to complete those applications, to do their interviews for the job, and they worked with us together, once again, in partnership. And that was leveraging a resource that was in the past not available to my kids, my agency, who didn't have those kinds of resources to be able to create summer job opportunities for young people that were system involved. So it's really thinking about, once again, what drove us was thinking about the well-being of young people, creating opportunity. How can we create different pathways for these young people, but realizing that we couldn't do that alone, that we needed experts, and really looking as to where the experts were. And there was a structural change, and there was this sense now that they had an obligation to our kids. This was our kids, not just my kids. And it really, and it's a step of transforming the way systems look at our kids, how resources are allocated, who gets those resources, and how you leverage each other's expertise and knowledge base. And so, as I think back about it, why hadn't we done this ever before in the history? No one ever thought of doing this. This whole thing of, well, people don't want to share resources. But you have to challenge that. These kids, for instance, I speak about the kids in the juvenile justice and child welfare. These are children like any other child who's entitled to receive all the benefits and resources and programming that any other child has. And so I think it's important for us to think about that and think how in the position that I'm in, how do I lead with that, principle? And so those are two examples. I have several others, but I do think that just tells you, how do we think out of the box? How do we think different if children were at the center of our work and well-being was at the center of our work and community was at the center of work? How do we make decisions and how would we allocate resources, which is what we did, and thinking about what do these young people need to be successful. And so I think that very much is informed by the principles of the blueprint and how we need to start thinking about the work that we're doing in the spaces we're in. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Gladys. What a great example of centering on well-being and what that does in terms of how you do your work and how it creates better access for resources to parts of our community that didn't have access to it prior. So thank you for those examples. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Gladys around her examples? Tanya, you let me know if there are any. Okay, so I'm going to do an example as well. This one's a little different lens on how to bring the blueprint to life. I want to give an example of an organization that has been involved with the blueprint. their drug and alcohol recovery program. They provide recovery services for families and individuals who are dealing with the issues of drug and alcohol addiction. They're in the Midwest. Their name, it's The First Call is the name of their organization. Their executive director is Susan Whitmore. And in talking with her, because we did some follow-up with people who had expressed interest in the blueprint and had made some commitments around it. And I followed up with her to see how, what was going on with her and her organization as a result of her involvement with the blueprint. And she attended the launch, and I also did some initial work with her, to kind of share with her what we were doing. And she had her team, her leadership team, come to the launch, and they really dived into the blueprint. And for where they were sitting, they decided to focus on the first principle, start with what matters to people well-being. That was the one that resonated with their leadership team in terms of something they wanted to focus on. And so they're using that principle and those recommendations to help them expand their thinking on their existing diversity and equity work. So they had been doing some things, and they felt like the blueprint helped put some more depth to what they were doing. They're specifically working on 1.1. They have a team that is looking at how to write up a one-pager around, looking at the historical roots of inequity and racial discrimination in their industry, and thinking about how to make that a part of the conversation so the community, their partners, and everyone knows they are aware of these things, and that they're working, they're an organization that is working towards addressing those issues. This is also by focusing on this first blueprint, they have sparked some conversations regarding staffing, looking at diversity in staffing. They're looking at their policies, how are their policies, what they're doing and not doing. And also they're looking at dedicating some funds to support their equity and diversity efforts. So that's just an example of how one organization is using the blueprint. And we wanted to share those with you because we get lots of questions. Well, how do I engage with this blueprint? What can I do with it? And so we thought some examples might be useful to you. Are there any questions? Raise your hand if you have any questions about First Call and their use of the blueprint, or any comments.
There was a question about the name of the organization that you were discussing, Phyllis.
It's First Call. Yeah. And so if there's no more questions, we're going to jump in and do some practice and let you guys, take some time to dive into one of the principles that might be of interest to our group, and really dig into it. And we would really appreciate your comments and your thoughts and conversation on this. This is a time and a place and an opportunity to really kind of begin to think and stretch our thinking about how this blueprint can be operationalized. So what we're going to do is do a poll with the group, and we're going to list all the principles. And if you could pick your top principle that you would like to focus on in terms of a discussion in our meeting today.
So you should see the poll on your screen now. We'll give just a few more seconds for folks to weigh in. Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and end the poll. And it looks like folks want to dig in a bit on the principle push against harms being concentrated in communities already facing the greatest adversity.
Principle 2, correct? So take a moment to look at that principle, and then we're going to go through a series of questions that we'll be asking, that would love for you to join in the conversation with your questions and comments and thoughts. And so we should probably put the questions into the chat. My guess is they're going to want that. Okay, so I'm just going to go through the slide briefly, and then we'll move into the questions. So in this principle, we're looking at pushing against harm being concentrated in communities already facing the greatest adversity. We know that historically, that often the communities that are struggling and disenfranchised can get further disenfranchised during crisis, and when it comes to resources and access to resources. So that is what this principle focuses on. And so then you have a set of recommendations that could help with addressing that principle. So, and things you can discuss and talk about in your organization with your community partners or with policymakers. So I'd like to kind of open it up and ask folks, one, you know, why did you, if you chose this one, and it was the majority, why did you choose this one? What about this interested you? And what do you see as the opportunities for this principle? And you can raise your hand or put questions in the question and answer. I do have a question about if we're going to make the slides available and distribute the link, and I think yes. Is that correct, Tanya?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay.
We'll have the recording and the slides all posted on the Wellbeing Blueprint website.
And we're also getting someone to ask to put the questions here too, the questions that we're talking about in terms of this principle. So I know folks chose this for a reason, so it'd be helpful. It'd be nice if you could share why you chose it and any opportunities or challenges you see with the principles. And we'll put all the questions in because maybe those will be questions you'd want to respond to as well.
And if you can, Phyllis, I would just, if you can also just read through some of the questions that might spark.
Yes, so the questions we're talking about, and I think we're trying to get those in the chat. What are the opportunities that you see with this principle? What would happen if we pushed against harms that were concentrated in communities always facing the greatest adversity? What are the potential challenges or roadblocks do we see that might be barriers to us advancing this? And how can we center in the work we do in this area on the community and on what matters most to people? And then finally, how do we work across silos and who could be partners in this work? Rachel raised her hand.
Hi. You know, this is really interesting, and I think I'm struggling with it a little bit. I'm working with older adults in nursing homes, and the harms being concentrated in this community is striking. I mean, they're profound right now with COVID, right? And they're both older adults and a lot of the frontline workers who are largely low-income women of color who are holding those jobs and suffering a great deal from the structures that are in place. And I guess the thing that I'm struggling with this is that there's a way that I wonder about, you know, there's something about the nursing home structure that marginalizes both groups, and by this sort of like dual marginalization of the people who are doing the caring and the people who are cared for, and putting it all in a corner in the box, that it slips under the rug. And so it's not, and there's something about this pushing against the harms that continues to, I want to like pull them back in rather than, you know, I want to like pull in the work in the nursing home, I want to pull the older adult and the CNA, the aides, back into the center rather than feel like I'm pushing against things that are being done to these people for them. So there's something that I wonder about here about like, not just starting with those least capitalized communities, but how do we recenter on them or re-engage them, or how do they become the leaders at the same time when you're balancing it with the 2.2 there, which is, you know, people aren't going to magically, you know, transform. None of us are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
That would be nice.
Thank you, Rachel, and good to hear from you. Good to hear your voice. Really good points and comments, especially around how do we center your example with the nursing home, and how do we center around the community and staff that are being affected as well, and they're all a part of the same community. So I think that's a really good point that you brought up. And this is where we try to envision what the opportunities could be. So what would be the opportunity? How could Rachel or someone who's working in that industry begin to center this around the people in the family who are most impacted? And I think there's, and so I'm asking that, and I'm also commenting on it. I think there's a way we look at it in terms of the organization, and then there's a way we look at it in terms of the bigger community and the systems that are impacting those organizations. So. Other comments on that?
You know, one of the challenges is how little that work is valued, you know, and how important it is, but how little that work is valued. And really part of the recentering that I think I hear is that we have to value that work. We have to value the folks that are in the senior in these nursing homes. And really the challenge is, how do we do that? What needs to change in the way we do that work, the way we fund it, the way we treat the workers? How, you know, it's really kind of, how do you deconstruct it? If we were going to, I mean, the challenge for me is to think about, if we were starting from square one, how would it look differently? How would we do this differently? Is this the best way to deliver services and supports to you know, older individuals? And so I think, you know, there needs to be a reimagining and rethinking about how do we do this work differently. You know, families are marginalized. You know, The wages are very low. And so the question, why is that? And if we were going to do this, if we had the opportunity to redesign these systems, what would be the values that we would put forth? And then that would drive how you would design a program, how you would design a system to deliver the kinds of services and supports that are necessary.
And Gladys, I think, you know, what you're saying about how would we do this differently totally relates to a comment that was in the Q&A from Marianne about the pandemic. Many of us and lots of systems and lots of organizations and agencies have had to do things differently, right? Because the pandemic has forced us to do that. And in that, there have been some things that have been put in place that actually have been better for people, better for communities, better for families. And how do we take not just those things that have been put in place for their pandemic, but really look at them in an intentional way of like, wait, could our system have been doing this all along? Right? It actually seems to work better for people, and not just put it in place as sort of an emergency, you know, crisis response, but really examine if this is working better for people, why can't this be the way our system, our organization, our agency operates, you know, in the long term, but really taking a look at what are some of the things that you've done and put in place in response to this crisis, in response to the pandemic, that are actually supporting people in a much different way and perhaps in a better way. And how do we keep those things in place?
Yeah,
you know, yeah, I was just going to add to your point, Tanya. I think that what's interesting is that I think it got worse in nursing homes rather than better. But I do think that the thing that's been lifted up and highlighted has been the fact of how important the workers are, how little we pay them, how the vast majority of people of color. I think those things have been lifted up and elevated.
And those become opportunities.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's the opportunity we have to focus on. How do you leverage that awareness now? Because bad things have happened. You know, staff has been, you know, affected, infected. They've had to work long hours. Families haven't been allowed to be in there. They haven't had the appropriate equipment, the testing. You know, other systems have been able to use this, for instance, in juvenile justice, to reduce the population. That was a good, you know, that was good. So now how do we continue that? But that didn't happen in the nursing home, right? But what did happen, we should really look at carefully and see, how do we capitalize on that? What kind of campaign can we create that sustains the fact that we don't pay these people enough? And why don't we pay them enough? And that—
what is it that we're valuing?
What we're valuing, right? I think that that's the opportunity now, if we're really embedding and thinking about these principles, that those are the next questions. You know, it's creating a group of people to start reimagining this and saying, how do we, you know, what are our next steps? I mean, that's how I would think about this, particularly in the nursing field. You know, I think about juvenile justice, which is the area that I'm presently focused on, and Phyllis, and thinking about the effort that we're both involved in. You know how we're going to reduce harm? We're going to close youth prisons, right? That's a big, bold thing. There's a lot of things that have to happen, but those are some of the bigger ideas that one has. But then thinking about other systems, how do you get there? And then even thinking about that, how do you work across silos? We've developed a partnership with progressive prosecutors, right? Those are opportunities now that have emerged as we elect prosecutors and elected officials that bring a different set of values. And so it's really about reimagining this work. And for me, it's really being guided by these principles.
Thanks so much, Gladys. Thanks, Phyllis. And as we knew, this hour has absolutely flown by. But thank you all so much for joining and sharing your questions, sharing your thoughts. And we want you to join us in this. The Wellbeing Blueprint truly is a living document, and we need lots of different voices to engage and help us to continue to shape this so that it really is a true roadmap to advance change and to drive change in this country. Visit wellbeingblueprint.org. So that's where you'll find the blueprint and all of the recommendations, ways to engage. You can sign on to the blueprint, share your own bright spots or examples, invite others to sign on and explore and really join this growing community of action. We've got the contact information there, so to continue to reach out to us with questions and ideas, ways we can support you in taking action, and look for other opportunities, other virtual events and conversations that we'll be doing as we continue to grow this community. So thank you everybody so much for taking time out of your day to join us. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Have a good
Thank
afternoon.
you.